Stephen, you mentioned Thomas Henry Day earlier. Now, I borrowed a book off of another bookmaker years ago. A fantastic read about the days back in the 30s. I believe there's something in there that you quite like the quote of.
Yes, one of his favourite quotes was from Julius Caesar, Shakespeare. There is a tide in the affairs of men which, taken at the flood, leads on to fortune. Or in modern day terms, when you're in form, crack on. Because what he forgets to mention is that later in the play, Brutus, whose quote that is, commits suicide.
So one thing that you were known for, you were a very flamboyant character on course. You used to arrive in your Bentley with your staff, wearing your mink coat. Staff were always paid way above everybody else, and you lived in a very des res. I mean, how important to your business was your image?
Well, it is important. It was a musquash coat, actually. The purpose of that was not so much for the image, but to keep warm. Because if you stood all day out in the freezing cold, I did feel the cold. So that was an effective way of not feeling too cold. But the image, it is important. I think the main image I wanted, though, was of integrity, which I like to think I have maintained.
So in the 80s and 90s, you were renowned for taking huge bets, even at small tracks. Do you think that facilitating getting lumps on at those places encouraged plots just to sort of tuck you up?
Well, it may have done, but I think the fact that I survived through them shows that they weren't all that successful on the whole, or that prevalent.
In those situations, for someone like Exeter, for example, if somebody came up and asked for a bet over and above what you would normally expect at that track, would you smell a rat and sort of have or call to them?
It depends on how I felt the strength of the market was, but no, I think it was important to retain the reputation for taking whatever was thrown at me.
Were there any contemporaries in those days that were your sort of competitors, if you like, on the rails, that would be taking similar sized bets to you at the time? Single men like yourself, not firms.
Well, Victor Chandler probably. He'd probably be the main independent rival. Certainly not Ladbrokes and Hills. You had to be a registered mug to get on with them. And there used to be saying that if you could get on with Ladbrokes, you didn't want to be on.
Now, there's a story about a charity race where I think some punters and maybe even combatants in it turn out to be less than charitable. Can you remember much? Can you tell us a bit about that one?
Yes, that was Gibberine at Chepstow. I presume that's the race you're thinking of. Where Declan Murphy rode the winner, and he'd come back from quite a nasty accident, and the jockeys let him win. Or most of the jockeys, I wouldn't say they were all non-trying, but most of the jockeys just let him win. And somehow it had been engineered that that he'd got the ride on the favourite, although it was supposed to be a random ballot. And the word had got out somehow that it was crooked. And I was very disappointed that the authorities didn't clamp down on what had happened.
Am I correct in thinking that was quite near the end of your career before you turned it in?
No, I think that was 1995. So it was about 5 years before I gave up.
Okay, so when you did finally leave, stuck to your guns when the NJPC took over, you worked briefly for Corals. Was it hard to go from being an independent self-made man to working for a wage?
Yes, I suppose it was. But what was particularly frustrating was all the office interference. And originally, Corals were quoted in the papers as saying, well, we're going to let Stephen do bet as he used to bet, and but when it came to it, there was too much office interference. They'd say, tell me which horses not to lay and so on, and if I laid a thick bet, sometimes they'd tell the floor men without me knowing even to have it back. And when we won, it was because the office guys were geniuses, and when they lost, when we lost, it was because I was an idiot. So yes, it was quite frustrating.
Back in those days, I remember your clerk, I believe he was called John, was revered around the ring because people would hear you machine gunning bets into him, ranging from grands to pound each ways. I don't think I ever saw him on the racecourse again after you finished. Do you know what happened to him?
Yes, he was a good clerk, certainly. He had just about all the qualities you want in a clerk, really. He was neat, discreet, fast, accurate. But after I gave up, he worked with us at Corals for a while on the course. And eventually he drove a taxi. He lived in Street, so he drove a taxi around Somerset. And then he died a few years ago from lung cancer.
Okay, I'm sorry to hear that. In the 20 years since you've left the betting ring, there have been some huge changes, not least the betting exchanges. Have you sat back thinking you got out at the right time?
Yes, very much so. I used to think, what a shame I wasn't born a few years early, and because I've missed the best years. And now I think, well, thank goodness all the changes happened at the end of my career and not in the middle of it.
Okay. So how do you feel about modern day bookmakers and the betting ring as it is now? Do you recognise it at all from your halcyon days?
Not really. No, it's very different now.
Do you think it's even worth sort of? Would you even think about being a bookmaker now if you were 20?
Well, probably if I was 20, I wouldn't know what I'd missed. So it certainly wouldn't be as attractive as a proposition as it was then.
Okay, you're still a regular face on quite a few race courses. Are you a gamekeeper turned poacher now?
Yes, I suppose so, to some extent. One aspect of modern day bookmakers, which I really can't understand, is their objection to arbitrages. There were some bookies who absolutely refused to take my bets, because they think, probably quite right, usually quite rightly, that I'm just trading. But I really can't see the objection to that. If they're offering a price, what does it matter, what the punter wants to do with his bet once he's had it? I used to take loads of bets from Tic Tacs, and it never knowing, of course, that someone in another ring was trading on that, and it never bothered me at all that someone might be earning out of that. If I was offering the price, I was quite happy to lay it.
So do you think it's an irrational obsession they've got these days?
I do, yes. And for some of them who want to be seen as big bookies, it's just totally illogical that they don't want to take any sort of bet from me.
Going back to when you were making a book, even as an on-course bookmaker, you were pretty much a household name. What qualities do you think were needed then to be a very successful bookmaker as to now?
Determination, I suppose, to succeed. Unflappability. Not to get tied up having opinions on horses. Integrity, as I referred to before. That's probably the main things.
Was it difficult not to have an opinion when, for example, one of your shrewdest punters that you found it hard to beat came up and had a really big bet on one?
Not really, no. Because I knew some of them would win and some wouldn't.
So you played very big. What type of racing and what time of year did you find it best to be a big layer?
I didn't really distinguish between times of year, and that's all. I suppose it was a bit harder in the summer when going was consistent. Because if the weather was consistent, I always loved to, though, when sometimes you get a sudden downpour. I always like to see jockeys coming the unusual side of a race course, because that always was always a good recipe for turn-ups.
Okay, so you talked earlier about greyhound racing. When you started greyhound racing, and then you went on with the Waterloo Cup coursing. Is that still a love of yours? Do you still follow greyhound racing?
I've never been that keen on greyhound racing. I've always preferred coursing, because that's the real thing.
Okay, thank you. And the other thing you mentioned earlier was cycling around race courses. I understand you cycled to all of them, including quite a few that don't even exist anymore. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Yes, well, after I left school, and even during the school holidays, that cycling was the only form of transport I could afford. So I used to cycle around and stay at youth hostels, which were 3 and 6 a night. And most weeks, I might be away from home. Was based in Lincoln at that time. Might be away from home for 2 or 3 weeks at a time. So when I went up to Scotland, obviously I'd do all the Scottish ones at the same time. And I used to be able to do that it would cost me about £3 a week, going racing 5 and 6 days a week, which seems incredible now. But, I had to watch every penny at that time. Sometimes if I say £3 a week, that's if there was nothing unexpected. But sometimes I might have to buy an inner tube, which was 6 and 8 pence, and a tyre, which was 13 and 4 pence, at the same time. That was a whole £1, and that was a real blow to the budget, that was, if that happened.
Were you any good at punting in those days?
Not particularly. I mean, I'd have bets, but though in those days I didn't keep a record of how I was betting, so I'm probably lost, but probably only lost fairly slowly.
And you mentioned at the beginning of the interview that your father was a vicar. What was his opinion of your chosen career path?
Well, he certainly wasn't what he'd planned, but he did have the good sense to let me do what I wanted to do, for which I'm grateful. Well, I did get as far as going to an interview at Queen's College, Cambridge, but I didn't really want to go, but I thought I'd go, because my parents wanted me to go, and the date they gave me happened to be the morning of a Newmarket race meeting, so I thought I could go to the interview and cycle off to the races. But I was quite frank about not really wanting to go, so they didn't actually offer me a place. But that was the nearest I got to going to university. But instead, I'm a proud graduate of the University of Life.
So what would have been the subject had the misfortunes have been accepted?
Maths.
Oh, well, that's not bad grounding for a bookie.
No.
So looking back on your career, what would you not do again, if anything?
I don't know the answer to that, really. There's no particular major things. Obviously, there were bets I wish I hadn't laid, particular bets. There were particular people I wish I hadn't given credit to. But I don't think there are any major things that I do differently.
So finally, from all your experience on the racecourse, what that's happened to you or with your business has taught you a lesson that you'd advise young bookmakers to learn from?
That again, I'm not sure what the answer to that is. I think I'd still advise people not to have opinions on horses. I don't think there's much I can add to that, really. Well, I started off my career with really two ambitions in mind. One, to be a bookmaker and just survive. I didn't particularly aim to be a top bookmaker. And secondly, to raise the image of bookmakers, which at the time was pretty low, because quite often you'd see some minor case came up in a magistrate court and the man would claim to be a bookmaker or bookies runner. And because, this was in the days before you really needed a proper license to be a bookie, so it was just a convenient thing to be described as. And, well, I'm not sure. I think the image of bookmakers has risen in the time, although I don't claim any particular credit for that. But and people used to ask me if I was going to be the second William Hill, and I always answered, no, I'm going to be the first Stephen Little. And I suppose I succeeded in that.
So would you do it all again?
Not in the present circumstances, no, because it's so different now. I don't think, if I tried to bet now as I used to, I'd be slaughtered in no time, I think.
Okay, Stephen, thank you very much.
Right.